Good morning. It's 11:34 a.m. on December 9th, 2020. This morning, when I got up, I had a conversation, and part of the conversation was revealing what is already something that has been proposed by people under former administrations that was not followed at the time, but it's very pertinent now. My understanding is that at the end of December, there is a reprieve that had previously been scheduled concerning student loan debt, and that it is anticipated that once the new year comes, that student loan debt is going to start coming due again, and that the period where it was allowed to be temporarily suspended is going to cease. There have been considerations and some discussion about the possibility of trying to get a forgiveness of federal loan debt. My understanding and my experience is that it is not forgiven. During the Affordable Care Act and the onset and the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, many people who identified to have a disability, including a mental disability or a mental illness that was allowed to qualify as a disability, including for the purposes of receipt of Social Security benefits, were offered a period of time during which they could have their student loans forgiven. They weren't forgiven. What happened, I understand, is that those student loans were connected to appropriations. They were actually part of federal outlay processes. And depending upon what you do with your education, you can either be connected with the appropriations process in a outlay that involves you having private credit that is established via participation in private credit institutions or private banks that allow for you to leverage the credit you've accumulated in some sort of private investment, or you can be put into and through some sort of public situation or public system that is accounted for through the federal appropriations process, i.e., if you end up needing to receive services from the Health and Human Services as a consumer or a recipient, this is different than having a job in the Health and Human Services Department where you receive federal benefits, but it is still nonetheless part of an outlay process and an appropriations process. Because there has been a misrepresentation of what specifically federal student loans are, and there's also been a misrepresentation about what it means to acquire other funding, up to and including student loan funding, but not exclusively student loan funding, from private institutions based upon the credit ability that has been assessed through your participation in a federal student loan program. We are in a situation of massive misaccounting. This has been going on for over 25 years. Now, I am not familiar with the student loan paradigm prior to the 1993 Omnibus Act, but I have personally been used for more than 25 years as mischaracterized reprogramming through various federal appropriations processes that reveal high crimes and significant malfeasance on the point not only of Congress, but in consideration of other people in the private sector that have disabused their access to people in government in order to cover up for serious crimes, including financial crimes. Now, during the onset of the Troubled Asset Relief Program, there was an office of a Special Inspector General that was set up. And part of what was recommended out of the office of the Special Inspector General is that, in coordination with what Congress was originally proposing, was a characterization of individual credit having to do with individual loan holders, and then through a reconsideration of their credit, including potentially how they had been defrauded and or attempted for enticement, extortion, or otherwise deceived into participating in fraudulent processes that led to the financial crisis, that there could be a recharacterization, and that those individuals, through the recharacterization, could then be used to assist in a recharacterization of the overall processes in which they were involved, including bonds that had been set up based on the aggregation of their loans and other factors that had been put into consideration around the financial situation at the time. That's not what ended up happening. That was what was proposed originally. That is what is intended originally. Somehow, somebody was able to influence, perhaps via extortionate means, but was able to influence the actual implementation of policy associated with the alleged bailout in a manner that I believe and have alleged and intend to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law was actually connected to a premeditated capital outlay process associated with the outroll of the digital economy. And because of that, we have been deceived for a substantial amount of time, and the accumulation of that deception is allowing the financing of COVID 19. I believe that what we need to do at this point in time is rather than accept an illusion of forgiveness, that we have to allow for a process whereby people work with individual loan holders or individual recipients of federal student loans in order to recharacterize their financing and their credit situation and to understand it explicitly as connected to an appropriations process associated with federal outlays, i.e., rather than accepting somebody saying they've forgiven your loans and then you being inured into accepting somehow you've been relieved of the financial burden so that somebody else can claim your human capital and can also involve you in processes of being used as derivatives or as some other sort of uncompensated labor associated with their financial paradigm. That we should have a process where people are apprised of and assessed for their skills and capabilities in a manner that allows for them to be given an understanding of options available to them in order to work toward paying off the federal debt obligation we have, the federal obligation. A debt and an obligation are separate. We were obligated without there being informed consent, but also without there being full disclosure of what the implications were. And in the course of that, there were people that were trying to cover up for the fact that they engaged in grotesque malfeasance in performance of their duties when it came to appropriations. It is not acceptable for people to go moonlight as if they're representatives of us in the legislative branch while they obligate us to trillions of dollars of debt service without appropriately accounting for it and without appropriately apprising us of what our obligations are in order to be able to fulfill the requirements of what they're alleging is going on. The second stage I believe we need to engage is a process of actually evaluating alleged small business assistance and starting with an understanding that small businesses have a very specific role in the economy that is not just about being pulled and aggregated and bundled into being used as some sort of aggregation that can then be used to create a new stock base for major players in the financial industry that have not been held accountable for at least 20 years. There have been more than 20 years on the record of intentional efforts to deceive the people and to deceive other people around the world based on an illusion of financial viability of major banking and financial services institutions that themselves refuse to apply the law. As a matter of fact, most of those major financial institutions were required since last July to engage in processes of greater disclosure. And instead what they did is they aided and abetted criminals that had already infiltrated the government in passing completely unconstitutional laws related to alleged confidentiality and saying that things are not supposed to be disclosed or that they're not going to disclose things. Not only were they legally and constitutionally required to disclose, but that they had committed to disclose as part of an international compact that had been in the works for over a decade. There's no excuse for them to say they don't have to disclose. There's no excuse for them to shut us off. And there's no excuse for them to say we're the ones that are broke and we have to concentrate everything about our efforts into covering up the fact that they tank the economy to intentionally be able to downgrade us, steal what's ours that's valuable, and claim it as their own. There was already a very serious and significant matter afoot in this country and around the world related to a necessary transition concerning the gas and oil industry and how the gas and oil sector was connected to other things going on globally. Part of what is going on with the forced medicalization of our entire economy is also about a theft involving actual national security roles, while people are being rewarded for criminal activity in order to compel and inure people into covering up for crime in high places. This is not acceptable. They've robbed us, and they're trying to make it as cheap as possible so that we feel that we're devalued, and they, by comparison, look like they're worth more than they actually are. There is a very sensible and practical approach. There were already people that as recently as 2008 had already come up with a means by which they could work with people around individual recharacterization of their credit and creditability. And then there are also people that are informed and are capable of working with people, including small businesses, in actually assessing what their capabilities and their contributions are, and how we can work toward a recharacterization. Part of this is going to have to be about acknowledging, liking it or not, they've already forced nationalized us. They've already spent a decade intentionally degrading and attempting to infiltrate nationalized sectors of other countries, countries that had a political commitment to nationalize sectors, including relating to financing and including relating to their energy sector. They intentionally degraded a concept of a national industry in order to force them into privatization, while they've now forced nationalized all of the private property and resources that we in the United States have available so that they can farm it out to people in finance and banking that have been completely irresponsible with what they've been doing for the last 10 and 20 years. It's unacceptable. It's not sustainable. We are going to need to have some serious lines of liquidity open. We're going to have to need those numbers. They're getting characterized in the wrong way, and they're being drawn down from the wrong sectors. We need other capital. And we need, first of all, to understand that we are the ones that provide it, not them. And they have no right to force us all into a pool and then recharacterize it with their brand on it and then make the rest of us compete for our lives while they literally murder people to cover their losses. They're the ones that lost. It's time for us to disassociate ourselves. It's time for us to cut the brand off. And it's time for us to get an understanding of what we're capable of and let them pay for themselves.